Hey everyone, Mark Price here, devslopes.com, and today we're going to build our very first React application, technically our second, but I'm actually going to explain how it all works so you can get an insight into the world of React. And the good news is, what we're doing here very much consists of what you're going to be doing in every React application. Unlike Angular, where you could spend weeks and weeks and weeks studying to figure out everything about it, the core things that we're going to be doing here, we'll be doing a lot and covers most of what you'll be doing with the React, which is really cool. So first things first, let me show you what we're going to be building here. So as you can see, ingredients, there's an input box and a button, not styled at all. Okay, it's really ugly, which is fine for now. And let's put in an ingredient, Chinese chicken. Is Chinese chicken any different than American chicken? Who knows? And let's say lettuce. As you can see, you add an item, it clears out the box and it adds it to the list. So there's a few different things going on here. And again, if you're thinking modularly, let's take a second to think about how we might build this application. What do you think? Well, we're going to have some type of manager, I suppose, that can manage the input and the button, like an overall component. And then we've got the actual list component, which can show one or more items in it. And then each item is going to be its own component. So we're going to have 3 components, which make up one component, if that makes any sense. And the add button and the input box, they could actually be their own components if we wanted them to be. But in this case, I didn't see a lot of sense in doing that because the functionality is fairly simple. So that's the application. Let's go ahead and use our skeleton project to get it up and running. I'm going to go to github.com. You should have a skeleton project up here by now or on your local file system. Okay. And I'm going to go into React Skeleton and I'm just going to click download zip. There it goes. It's a little bit large, 16.8 megabytes because I've included the NPM modules inside of it. And just pull it up over here on my desktop. Double click it to unzip it. It's doing its thing. I'm going to close out of the browser here. Okay. And if you're wondering, like, why is it going so slow? Is that how Mac computers are? No, it's because I've got heavy video processing going on while I'm talking to you because I'm recording all of this. So I'm going to delete this zip file here, and I'm going to rename this one to React Ingredients. This is our ingredients application. And open it up, and there's our application. So what you can do is you can open up Atom and open up this folder, or what's really fun is I can go to terminal, okay, and go on my desktop, Command K to clear. And by the way, if you're new to terminal, I am just pressing tab as I'm typing and it auto completes the rest. And let's go into CD React-ingredients, perfect, okay. And that's all there, looking good. And I'm going to say Atom dot. And what it's going to do is it's going to open up this whole project folder in Atom for me. Like so. It did it on my second monitor there. Okay, so there we have it. And just like our other application, we have this list and list item. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to rebuild these both. So I'm going to delete both of these. These were just to test and make sure the compiling works. So I'm going to right click and go to delete, move to trash. Okay, so let's get rid of that and get rid of that. Okay, so we've got our project here. This is our skeleton project. We know everything's there and working because we've already tested it. And I just deleted the list and list items because we are going to remake those. And so let's go ahead and remake them. And we'll talk about what we're doing along the way. So my components, let's go to new file. Components, and let's call this one list item because it's the smallest component. It's the most furthest down component. That's how you should work with React. Smallest component at the bottom all the way up. List item.jsx. Okay, and I just saved it there. And very similar to before, equals require. We're going to require the React module. And var list item equals react.create class. Besides, repetition is how we remember things. Okay, and then we have a render function which will return the actual HTML. But let's talk about this for a second here. Okay, so we've imported React. That is needed to use React.createClass. And just like in object-oriented programming, we are creating a class, okay? So something that's reusable, not a CSS class, not a styling class, an object or a class, a class that can be reused, made into an object. You can instantiate it more or less. And so what we're doing here is this variable right here, list item, we are saying, hey, this is a reusable component. So right now, we're not using it, we're just defining it. Okay, we're not using it, we're defining it, and we're calling it a list item. And so the actual name of this right here, when you create the class, that's what it'll actually be called when you're behind the scenes, when you're creating it, is your list item. This is how you're going to use it. And so every class, okay, every React class has, when you call the function, it has an object, okay? It takes as its first parameter here an object. And this object has a render property, as you can see right here, okay? And what render does is it takes your JSX, your HTML and JavaScript, and when you insert the things into it like we're about to do and like we did before, it takes that, it calls that render function, and that's what it actually shows on the screen. And React handles this all under the hood for you. So all you have to do is just define your class here, and React will do the rest and show it on the screen, but you have to put it inside the render function. This is the start of life right here, okay? And so then you got to return the actual JSX that you want to use, which is HTML with JavaScript mixed into it. And so in our case here, and I'll put the parentheses on here in a moment, but in our case here, we have a list item, we want a header item, and we're going to say, oops, curly brace, this.props.text, end curly brace, end h4, and end li. Now, last time I broke these all up, indented them. You don't have to. I'm just showing what you can do. And you can actually put a semicolon there, and it's considered a valid expression in JSX. A lot of us React developers, though, will put the parentheses on just to show that this is your React code, make it more readable, kind of more like JavaScript. And I like to indent everything myself, of course, so it looks more readable. Now, this is JSX, and one thing to know is these curly braces right here indicate that this is JavaScript, okay? So this.props.text is an expression in JavaScript. You can write any type of JavaScript you want inside of these curly braces, which is really cool. So you can't write the JavaScript here or here. It has to be inside the curly brace, and that's how you define JavaScript. So what we're saying here is this, referring to this component, this .props. Props is an object for properties, okay? This .props.text, text would be the name of the key of that object's properties. And so what we're saying is, hey, grab the property text from this specific object. So right here at the most low level here, we are assuming that there are going to be properties, and that one of those properties is going to be text. It has not happened yet, and we have not created it yet or passed down that property yet, but we're assuming it beforehand. And that's how you work with React. From the lowest level down, you create the properties, you use the properties that are going to be created as you build your way up, which we haven't done yet. So that's it though. Like at its very basic level, this is React. You can create components just like this. And this is an HTML element that has data put into it. So what's going to happen is when this is rendered on the screen, instead of this.props.text, it's going to grab the data that's supposed to go in here and it's going to put it into the header, which is really, really cool. Well, not the header, the H4. But that's how it works. Very powerful, very simple when you think about it. Again, this is not JavaScript, this is JSX, and so it's a mix of JavaScript and HTML. And of course, if we want to reuse this, we have to export it. Exports equals list item, okay? Very cool stuff. And there's other properties and things you can do with React classes, but this is the basics here, so that's fine. And remember, you need to return, this function here needs to return the HTML. When this is called by React, it will expect to return some type of expression here like so. So there you have it. Any questions so far? Good? Okay, moving on. So there's our list item. We've exported it here. And let's go ahead and create our list itself. So new file, I right-clicked on components, and let's type in list.jsx. All right, pretty cool. And there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and say var react equals require react, just like we did before. Got to import it. Var list item, got to import that as well too. Okay, and it's in the same directory, so We'll just import it like such. All right. And then var list equals react.create class. Okay. So now we got to do the same thing. We got to create a list class, okay? And of course, if you remember right, this is an object, so it takes a function here. So let's put in our function like so. All right. And let's think about what we want to do here. Okay, we want to create a list of ingredients, right? So it's going to be very similar to what we did before. However, if you remember right, I said that React expects you to have unique identifiers, and it's not forced upon you, but it's very important that you try and make any list items that you have unique. And here's the reason why. React is, one of the goals of React is to be very, very fast, okay? Angular is very, very slow, at least Angular 1X, okay? 2.0 is supposed to be amazing, and I haven't played around with it much yet, but React is super, super fast. That's one of the goals, and that's why we're working with node modules and not just doing it all in the browser, like the compiling instantly, because we want it to run fast. And so that's how they designed it. And so when they're rendering components, like if you remove a list item or if your DOM changes, the virtual DOM that they give you, if it changes, they want it to be as quick as possible. So it's not always about re-rendering the entire screen. Sometimes they just remove an element from an array and then rename things, like insert text into items where they used to be. Well, if you don't give your list unique identifiers, you can have problems where it's showing the wrong data. So remember this now, rule of thumb. Just get in the habit of any type of list that you're showing, make sure you give it a unique identifier. You don't have to do anything crazy. I'm just going to show you a real simple way to do that. But give your items unique identifiers so there's no confusion. So what we're going to do is we're going to say var create item, okay, equals function. It's going to take text and an index. All right. So this is just a function, right? And it's going to take the text and it's going to take the unique index of this item in the array. And what we're going to do is we're going to return list item where key equals, here's the curly braces, this is JavaScript now, okay? Index plus text, all right? And where text equals text. All right, let's talk about this here. So we've created a function that it's going to take a text input and an index, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pass down to our list item, we're going to pass down a unique key, and we're going to pass down the property text. Now, when you see this key and equals and this text equals, these are the properties. Okay, so in our list item, when you see this dot props, this is where they're coming from. So if you're wondering, how do I get properties or how is it passed down to this item? This is how it's done from your component that's above it. Remember, in React, things trickle down, okay? So it's not vice versa. There's no real two-way data binding in React. You can do some things to do that, but it's not like Angular where there's two-way data binding. It's one way from the top all the way down, which creates a very clean interface, keeps your data and your state where it needs to be. So when you pass data down to a component like so, you will pass it into these properties like this, where key equals index plus text and text equals text. You can put as many on here as you want, and they will be here because JavaScript allows you to add as many objects at runtime as you want, okay? Sorry if I'm overkilling this here, but this is really important to understand. Your properties trickle down when you pass them in like this, and this is the way Facebook recommends. There's different ways of doing it you may run across, different ways of getting data over to other components, but this is the way that Facebook wants you to do it. They want you to pass it in to your components when you're creating the component itself. So what we're doing here is in the key property, which we made up here, okay, we are passing in the index plus the text. We haven't passed in the index yet. We haven't retrieved it yet, but we're adding these two together to create a unique ID for each one, okay? And then where text equals the text itself that needs to be passed down from these parameters. And maybe you're wondering, okay, so there's a function here, but how is it getting called, et cetera, et cetera? Well, remember the map function that we were defining before? We are going to do the same thing now with our UL. This .props.items.map, okay? We'll call it create item. Okay, there it is. And then we're going to end the UL. Don't be confused if you're confused with this line of code here, okay? If you remember, JavaScript map, what it does is it will iterate through your entire array, and it will call whatever function you pass into it. Oh, okay. So if you think about this, let's say we had items. Let's say items had 500 elements in it, okay? and we wanted to go through each of those items in the data set. When I say items, like the actual data, let's say it came from a server somewhere and we have a list of 500 items in JSON data, whatever. We want to iterate through those, and for each item in there, we want to actually create an item. So all we've done is called the map function of an array. So we're pretending items is an array, and we're calling the map function and passing in the function that's going to be called each time. So if there was 500 items, this function would be called 500 times, and we would map it, and then it would pass in the text and the index of that object. And again, we are assuming that items is set up for us and ready to go. This is another property that hasn't been created yet. Okay, so we're assuming there's an array called items, and in each element of the array there's a text and an index of some sort we're going to pass in. Okay, and here's the function. So here's the create item function we're passing in each time. Now keep in mind that data trickles from the top down, so we are assuming that items is coming from our list manager. Remember, there's the list manager, then there's the list, then there's the list item. Okay, so we're assuming that the list manager sent down data called items. This is the name of the property. We're assuming it sent that down to us, and we're going to call it this map function right here for every item that's in that array. Okay, and then we're going to pass in the index and the text to this item here. As I hope you can see how the data is starting to trickle down. It went from list manager, which we haven't created yet, into right here, these properties, and these properties we further pass into each list item right here with the key and the text. Whew, a little bit crazy, I know, but if you start thinking about it visually, it'll start to make sense as it comes down. Okay, so we're going to return a list and inside that list, it's going to return a list item. See, this list is going to have these list items. If it was a list of 500, it would be 500 of these inside of this UL, and that's technically what's being rendered at runtime. So it's really cool. And inside the curly braces, of course, that's JavaScript. And then lastly, we need to export it. Okay. Again, we have not created items yet. We will do that now. So, okay, looks good to me. Let's do another component called list manager. New file, right-click components, and go to listmanager.jsx. Okay, and this is where a lot of the magic's going to happen. It's very common in React that the user input, or the level where the user input is happening, whether it's a button click or some other thing, it's usually happening at the top level where, or rather, the data that you are getting happens at the top level and goes all the way down from there. Okay, it's not very common that your lowest level somehow retrieves the data. It usually comes from the top level and trickles down. And so our list manager is our top level. So let's go ahead and get that started. So var react equals require react, var react DOM equals require react DOM. Okay, very cool. All right, and var list manager equals react.create class. So nothing different so far. It's all looking good here. And actually, I'm not sure that we need this React DOM. I think I was just typing stuff. What the heck? Okay, so we are going to create another class, but we're going to do this one a little bit differently because this class can receive user input, and there's some things that we need to handle. Okay, so we're going to call a function here, or a property. Excuse me. We're going to define a property. Wow. Initial state. I try and use. Sometimes I say stuff, and like it comes out where you can understand it. But if I don't say the right terms and phrases, sure enough, someone will be like, "Hey, why did you say this word? You need to use the correct phrasing." And I'm like, "Oh, I know." So this is a property of an object called getInitialState. And what you need to understand is that every class in React that you create, every component, it will call this property, which is a function. It will call getInitialState right when the component first loads. This is only ever called once, okay? When the component first loads, getInitialState is called. We did not create an implementation of this in our other components, but we're doing that now, okay? So even though on the other components we didn't define this or override this, okay, it will still be called. And so we have an array of items, and I'm going to call this new item text because what we're going to do is we're actually going to have text in the input, and we need to store that somewhere, kind of like a running or floating variable that we can store and use. And so we have an array of items that we want to set to an empty array, and then new item text. And just to show you our list, remember we're expecting an array of items. So now you can see where it's kind of coming from. This could have came from the internet, from wherever. We're just defining it as an empty array right here and get initial state. Okay, and what do we want to do? So the user enters text in the text input box, and then they press the submit button. And what we want to do is we want a new list item to appear. So how do we do that is the real question. And let's actually add one more import here. List equals require. We've got to have our list.jsx so we can use that and pass data down into it. But basically, we want to handle the submission of data. So let's handle that now. Handle submit. Okay, this is a function that we are creating that we will call when the button is pressed, okay, to submit new data, and it will call this function and it will handle data here. So what we're going to do is E for element, because we're going to pass in the element that comes. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say e.prevent default. And the reason why we're going to call this is because I'm not actually going to use the on click of the button itself. We're going to use the form, the HTML form, the on submit function, okay, because that'll override it. But I don't want the click accidentally to be called, so I'm going to just stop it from the click from triggering, because we're going to handle the submission event from form.on or form.onSubmit. So standard HTML. Okay, and var current items equals this.state.items. Ooh, what is this? So components have properties and they have state. Okay, just like you saw this.props. My component here has a this.props as well. However, this.props should only ever be read-only. Okay, write this down, put it in your journal. This.props is only ever read-only. You pass data down into properties. This.state, okay, is when you have data that can change. Okay, mutable data. So that's very important difference. Never ever mutate properties. Okay, keep your mutated data, the data that you're going to change, in the state property here of your object. And one more thing, write this down. This is really important. This, okay. If you have ever worked in JavaScript, you know the keyword this can be a pain. This inside of a function, outside of a function. How do you grab references to the right things? Here is something really cool that I want you to know and appreciate and love. React handles this for you. You can put this anywhere and it knows what you're talking about. Okay, you don't have to like create a variable called this reference and then access it from inside your other functions. React knows what to do with all of your this statements and handles it magically for you. That is really cool. So this.state.items is referring to this component. We don't have to worry about this inside of this function here. We don't have to worry about that overriding anything. It just knows. It makes it all work for us automatically, which is awesome. This is one of the biggest pains JavaScript has ever offered humanity. Okay, and so what we're going to do is current items.push this.state.new item text. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to first grab the items right here in the existing state. Okay, and then what we're going to do is that new item text, which right now is empty, but that new item text, we're going to push it to the end of the array. Okay, so we haven't actually set this yet, but we will. So we're assuming that at some point in time, we're going to add data into this state property here, new item text, which will be the new item that you want to use, and we're going to push it onto the array. And then lastly, this.set state. Okay, we're going to say items, current items, and then we're going to set new item text back to empty again. Okay, you'll see this all come together in a second here, but set state. Okay, set state is a property of a class in React, okay, or excuse me, a function. So set state, you will call that whenever you want to change the state of your application, and it takes an object with properties. So whatever you pass into here is going to be your properties of your state, okay. And so I could have excluded one of these. I could have added both. You don't have to have them all in there. Whatever you change in there is what's going to change in the state of your React class. Okay, so what we're saying here is, hey, take these current items, which we've added the new item onto, and let's now change the items here, okay, in the state. Let's change it to be this new array here, okay. you don't just want to go and push it onto the state itself. You actually need to set the state in the set state function, which is why we didn't right here just say this dot current item or this dot state dot current items dot push. No, that's not how you do it in React. In React, you need to explicitly set your state and then update the items, which is why we did it this way. And then, of course, we are setting the new item text back to an empty string. We're assuming that we're going to clear out the box and let the user add a new thing. Okay, so that's what happens when we handle the submit button. We actually haven't created the submit button itself. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's do the render function, which you're familiar with, because our list manager needs to put all the pieces together, right? It needs to put the list and the list items together and the input box and everything in there. So let's go ahead and do that now. And there we go. So this, you've seen this before. This is just standard JSX code here, okay? And so for the header, or excuse me, for the title, we're going to use a header, an H3, okay? So this dot properties dot title, the title of the, the title of the box, okay? Meaning like, is this a Christmas to-do list? Is this an ingredients to-do list? You see what I'm saying? You can actually give a name to the title of your box. And we want this to be dynamic. This is what I was talking about when I said, don't just hard code things into your components. Like I could have right here, I could have just said, Christmas to do. I could have done that. But is our component now reusable? Not really. Now, from now on, we have just a Christmas box. When instead, I want to be able to have many to-dos, and I want to be able to pass the title in. So we're going to make that title dynamic there. Okay, start thinking the React way, okay? Reusable. Now we're going to create an HTML form, and we're going to call the onSubmit function. Now again, onSubmit is an HTML function of your form, which can call a function. And so we don't want to do the click on the button itself. We don't want to use that event. We can do this one. We could have done it either way. I chose to use the form onSubmit. And on submit, we're going to say this dot handle submit. Okay, so we're calling the function here that we created, this dot handle submit. And notice, this is so cool about React. This dot handle submit, it knows how to find this. Do you know in regular JavaScript, this right here would be referring to our function here, right? Kind of interesting. So it would be referring to this function here. It would never be able to find this because this is an outer property. React handles this all for you. So just say this dot handle submit and it knows what it's doing. It's grabbing the function, and notice it is not calling the function here. We're just passing a reference to the function, and it will be called at a later time when the user is actually clicking something. Okay, so we've got our form. So let's put our input box in here. OnChange equals this dot onChange, which we have not created yet. And value equals this dot state dot new item text. Let's talk about what we just did here. So we created an input box. And onChange, well, in HTML, the onChange function is called every time a keystroke is entered onto an input box. So what we want to do is we want to handle that, meaning when a user types in, we want it to show up in the input box. We can't use default things for some HTML elements. Like maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't get it. When I type in an input box, it automatically updates it. Well, yeah, it does. But with React, we've kind of got this virtual DOM going here, and we need to explicitly reflect the changes that we want to show on the element, so everything works the way it should work. So we're going to call a this.onChange function, which we haven't created yet, and the value of this input box is going to be this.state.new item text. Okay, this value right here, okay, it's directly referencing the value that we're actually going to be saving and storing. So if you go look at the documentation for input box, there is a value property. In essence, we're kind of overriding that property here. And so what we're saying is this.state.new item text is where we want the data to be saved that's going into this. So when the user's typing, it's going to go into new item text right here, okay? So that's the data, that's where we're going to push that data when we submit the data, or press the button, I mean. Of course, a simple button. Pretty cool. Add button. And let's end the form. And then what? Well, we need our list, right? So list, we've created our list above, and we're going to pass in the items. Remember, in our list here, it's expecting a property called items, this.props.items. This is the moment where that data is being transferred over into items. This.state.items, okay? Let's end that, and let's end the div. And let's put a semicolon here. All right, so Are you confused a little bit? It's okay. It's going to take a little bit of practice to understand this. But to recap, we've now created the actual HTML, okay, a dynamic title, which we'll grab from a component above it. And on submit, so when the user presses on submit or the button, this form's going to override that, and it's going to call this.handle submit, where we grab the current items, then we add the new item on top of it, and then we set the state, so we update the items in the state like so. We clear out the data so it's empty again. And because the value of this input box is tied to new item text, when this is cleared out, this value of the input box will be cleared out. And again, like I said, this value right here normally is referring to the value that's in the actual box itself. That's not the case here. This value equals, this is the value of the data that's going behind the input box. So that whatever you're typing in, this is where we're going to save that data, which is why we have to implement onChange. If I didn't have onChange on here, which we haven't created yet, but if I haven't created this here, the data wouldn't show up in the box. And so we need to reflect the data in the box. That's how React works. We need to show that the user's typing, it goes into the box. And this value is not referencing the data that's just in the box visually to the user. It's referencing the data that's connected to that input box. If that makes any sense behind the scenes, you'll get it as you play around with it more and more. And then of course, the actual list itself is this.state.items. So we're showing the list of items. Every time that an item is added, this will be re-rendered by React, which is really cool, okay? So it will be re-rendered every time you add an item. So we only need to add this here once. No update functions, nothing like that. Just add it there once. And whenever it detects a data change, okay, it will re-render all these list items, which is really cool. Really, really cool, actually. And let's go ahead and create that onChange function right now. Okay. And this is this.setState new item text. Okay, and that's gonna be e.target.value. Okay, let's talk about this. So this.setState. So remember, you call setState whenever you want to change data, right? This time we're only changing new item text, and we're grabbing the element, E for the element, target and value. Keep in mind that your form on submit and input onChange, these are HTML callback functions, and it will automatically pass in the element for you, the HTML element. We are not doing anything magical there. That is not React, that is pure HTML. So what's happening is whenever the user does a keystroke on the input box, it calls this.onChange, passes in the element, and then what we're saying is, hey, let's change the state. Let's change the new item text to be equal to e.target.value. Okay, so we're setting the target text. It goes here into the value box and updates it so it shows it to the user and it's tied to the actual data source. So that is the onChange function, the handle submit function, and the render function. I highly encourage you to go in and even right now, stop this video or after the video is done and look at every line of code until you perfectly understand it. It is so important that you get this down before you move on because this is the core components of working with React, okay? And lastly, what we need to do is export this, right? So we can use it at a different level. So module.exports equals list manager. Okay. Looks good, looks good. All right. It's looking good. So now we have our list manager. Woo! It's quite a bit of work, I know. But that's okay. And let's go into our main.jsx, right? This is our, oh, I forgot to empty this one out. This was from our React skeleton. But the main.jsx again is our entry point, right, to our application. So let's see how we're doing here. We don't need list this time. So we do need React. We do need React DOM, although this time we need the list manager. Okay. And this is going to be in components/list manager.jsx. Okay. And it's in the components folder. Of course, our main.jsx, as you can see right here, is in the same directory as components. So we're going first into components and then, of course, grabbing the list manager.jsx. And we're going to go to React DOM.render. It's going to be list manager, okay? Where title, remember how I said we wanted to be able to give our list manager box a unique name? This is where we're setting it. And remember, this is a property, this.props. We're passing down a property. This is immutable, meaning we should never change it. Ingredients, looks good to me. Let's end that. And the second one, of course, is going to be the element that we want to override. So get element by ID. This is going to be ingredients. Okay, so let's just do one more check here on our public index.html. So we still have that ingredients there. The skeleton's still in place for the main.js. So all we need to do to make sure this is working is run it with Node, which will run our NPM process, which will run our Watchify and compile our code for us. So moment of truth, let's see if we have any errors. Okay, so terminal, where are we? We're in React ingredients, which is right where we need to be. Let's go ahead and say npm start. Oops. I happen to be using something called Node Version Manager, okay? And that allows you to run multiple versions of Node on your computer. I did not instruct you to do this, but I need to do that with mine. So I'm just going to say nvm use, and we're going to say 4.1.1. Actually, I think it's 4.2.2. There we go. Okay, again, NVM is Node Version Manager. It allows you to use multiple versions of Node on your computer because sometimes certain applications require a certain version of Node, and you don't want to have to uninstall and reinstall it. Again, you don't have to do this. It's just what I did. But now you know if you ever want to mess around with that. This course is not about Node, though. It's about React. So, okay, let's type npm start. All right, here it goes. It's running, it's running, it's running. Hey, it didn't give us any errors. Okay, which is good. Let's just take a look at the code. Go into React Ingredients, public, and let's just open it up on a browser. Let's say ingredients is going to be thyme, paprika, and it's working. So our app is definitely working. Let's take a look at the source here. Let's go to view page source. Isn't that interesting? That's real interesting. I'm going to talk about this in another video, but notice how it's not actually showing your list elements. Ooh, very, very interesting. I'll give you a hint though. React actually uses a virtual DOM, doesn't even use the real DOM. We'll talk about that later on though, but really cool. It's actually working. And just to show you, in case it wasn't working, let's take off this bracket here. Okay, and let's go back to the terminal. And there it is. Syntax error, unexpected token on line 528 of main.jsx, line 5, character number 28. It even told me where the error was. How smart is that? So if you do have errors, it'll give you a syntax error or some other type of error like that. But that is the very first React application. It's a simple application, and I extended it a lot longer because I explained a lot of things to you. But this is really cool stuff. Very modularized and very fast. This is very, very fast when it's rendering on the browser. So good job. If you don't understand everything, we are going to do some exercises, and you can join me in the chat room. I'm there most of the time, and a whole bunch of other people as well too, helping each other learn. So that's it. Your very first React application. Give yourself a pat on the back. Let's go on and move forward. And remember, to get your free live help, go to devslopes.com and click on chat room. I'm there all the time, as well as a huge community of other students.